The older I get, the harder it is to sleep through the night. Maybe it's the creak in my knees. Maybe it's the way memories decide to rise like restless ghosts when the house is quiet. Or maybe it's just age itself that won't let me drift too deep anymore. That night, the clock on my nightstand glowed a dim red 3:07. I lay there on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall. Beside me, the silence pressed down like a heavy blanket, broken only by the slow rhythm of my own breath. I turned over, closed my eyes, tried to force myself back into sleep. But my mind wouldn't obey. Worries crept in, small but sharp, my aching bills, my health. The way my son Daniel had been so distant lately. He had been my pride once, the reason I worked double shifts, the reason I sold my truck to pay for his college, the reason I kept pushing even when my body begged me to stop. But in the stillness of that night, I felt the space between us like an ache that had no cure. A faint sound cut through my thoughts, a muffled scrape, like metal against dirt. I held my breath, straining my ears. The sound came again, steady, deliberate. I sat up slowly, my joints protesting the movement, and walked to the window. The curtain brushed my arm as I pulled it back, just enough to see into the yard. The moon was thin, almost gone, but enough light spilled over the grass to reveal a shadow moving. My heart tightened when I realized it wasn't a stranger. It was Daniel. My own son stood at the far corner of the yard, bent over, a shovel in his hands. The earth rose and fell with every thrust, dark soil piling beside him. I blinked hard, certain I was imagining things. But no, it was him. His shoulders hunched, his movements hurried, almost desperate. I pressed a hand against the cold glass, my pulse quickening. What could he be doing out there at this hour? The boy I once rocked to sleep, the young man I believed I knew so well, was digging in the middle of the night like a man hiding something. 1,000 questions burned in me, but none found an answer. I only stood there, frozen, watching as his figure shifted against the pale light, burying something I couldn't see. For a long moment, the night felt heavier than it ever had before. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that maybe he was fixing something, or covering some mess. But deep inside, I already knew this wasn't ordinary. Something in his movements carried a weight, a secret too heavy for him to bear in daylight. I let the curtain fall back into place, my chest rising and falling too fast. Sleep was no longer possible. My son was outside in the cold earth at 3 a.m, and the sound of that shovel would echo in my mind until I found out why. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the shadows stretching across the floorboards. The muffled scrape of the shovel still rang in my ears. My fingers trembled as I rubbed my temples, telling myself it couldn't be what it looked like. He was my son. Daniel wasn't some stranger I didn't know, and yet, the image of him hunched over in the dark, burying something with that nervous urgency, refused to leave me. I got up and wandered down the hallway, each step slow and careful, the old wood creaking under my weight. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water. But even the coolness sliding down my throat couldn't calm the unease building inside me. Through the small kitchen window, I saw the faint outline of him still moving, his shovel biting into the earth. The moonlight caught the sweat on his face, even in the cold night air. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if afraid someone would catch him. I pressed my hand against the counter to steady myself. A father should know his son. But at that moment, I realized I didn't. I had no idea what was driving him to dig into our yard at this hour. No idea what weighed so heavily that he couldn't wait until daylight. I thought of all the times I had looked at him across the dinner table recently. His eyes avoiding mine, his answers clipped and hurried. He used to talk to me about everything. Lately, silence had become his language. From down the hall, the grandfather clock struck 3:30, its chimes hollow and haunting. The sound seemed to ripple through the house, each echo stretching the night longer, heavier. I leaned against the window frame, my breath fogging the glass, watching him finish covering the hole. He patted the soil down with his boot, quick and rough, then stood back for a moment, staring at what he had done. His shoulders sagged. Then, just as quickly, he picked up the shovel and hurried back toward the house. I stepped away from the window before he reached the porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't let him know I had been watching. When I heard the back door close quietly and his footsteps retreating down the hall to his room, I sat in the dark kitchen, gripping my glass of water until my knuckles turned white. I should have felt relief when the yard fell silent again, but I didn't. Instead, I felt the chill of something I couldn't name, a fear that had nothing to do with the night itself. I had seen my son bury something at 3 in the morning, and no matter how I tried to reason with myself, I knew that what lay beneath that soil was not going to let me sleep. The hours that followed stretched like an endless rope, each minute dragging me deeper into unease. I returned to bed, but my body refused rest. I lay there in the dim glow of the nightstand clock, staring at the ceiling while the image replayed over and over. Daniel's shadow bent low, dirt flying in rhythm, something dark and heavy disappearing into the earth. My mind reached for explanations, desperate ones. Maybe it was nothing serious. Maybe he had found an old box of his belongings and decided to hide it. Perhaps he wanted to surprise me with some secret project, though the thought crumbled as quickly as it came. A man doesn't work with such urgency at 3 in the morning for a gift. He doesn't keep looking over his shoulder like a thief if it's something harmless. I sat up again, restless. The room felt smaller by the second, the air thick with doubt. A father isn't supposed to question his own son. And yet that night, every memory of Daniel's recent behavior returned with sharper edges. His late-night phone calls muffled behind closed doors, the unexplained absences, the way his smile had grown forced and fleeting. I remembered how, just a week earlier, I'd asked him if everything was all right. He had smiled without meeting my eyes and said, "Don't worry, Dad. It's nothing." But his voice had cracked at the edges. At 4:30, I gave up on sleep entirely. I rose quietly, careful not to make the floor creak, and walked back to the window. The yard was still, blanketed in the pale hush of dawn's earliest light. The patch of earth Daniel had disturbed was visible even in the dim gray, darker than the rest of the soil, too fresh to blend in. It stood there like a scar on the yard, a reminder of what I had seen. I wrapped my robe tighter around my shoulders and sat in the chair by the window. My thoughts wandered back to when Daniel was a boy. He used to wake me at night when he had nightmares, small hands shaking me until I sat up. I would walk him back to bed, stay with him, until he fell asleep again. Back then, his fears were of shadows on the wall. Now I was the one staring at shadows, and they belonged to him. Somewhere between then and now, something had changed, and I had missed it. By the time the first bird called outside, I knew one thing with certainty. I would not find peace until I uncovered what lay beneath that soil. The night had given me only questions, and the morning was demanding answers. The morning light crept slowly through the curtains, turning the shadows in my room into shapes that felt too sharp, too real. My eyes burned from the sleepless night, but my body carried a kind of restless energy, the kind that comes when you know the truth is just a few steps away. I moved through the kitchen quietly, each sound of the kettle and the clink of the cup louder than it should have been in a house that still slept. Daniel's door remained closed down the hall. I listened for movement inside, but heard nothing. He was either still asleep or pretending to be. I stood by the window with my coffee, staring at that patch of soil in the yard. It looked almost ordinary now, but my heart tightened each time I thought of what he had buried there. The earth doesn't lie, it holds secrets until someone dares to dig them out. And I couldn't wait any longer. I set the cup down, grabbed the old shovel leaning against the shed, and walked to the corner of the yard. My steps felt heavy, as if the ground itself was warning me to turn back. The morning air was damp, and the soil smelled fresh, raw, alive with whatever Daniel had hidden beneath it. My hands shook as I pressed the blade into the dirt. The first clump came up easily, soft from his digging just hours earlier. I kept going, the sound of metal biting into soil echoing in my ears, faster and faster, until sweat rolled down my back despite the cool morning breeze. My heart pounded, each beat matching the rhythm of the shovel. I kept glancing at the house, half afraid Daniel would suddenly appear at the window, watching me the way I had watched him. But the curtains remained drawn. Silence pressed in around me. After a few minutes, the shovel hit something solid. My breath caught. I dropped to my knees, pulling the dirt away with my hands, my nails filling with soil, as I uncovered the shape of a box. It was small, black, and heavier than I expected when I dragged it up into the light. My chest heaved, my pulse racing as I fumbled with the lid. The hinges creaked, and for a moment I wished I had the strength to stop myself. But it was too late. I pulled it open and saw what was inside. The world seemed to tilt, my vision blurred, and a coldness swept through me so quickly I couldn't breathe. My body swayed, the box slipping from my hands as the ground rushed up to meet me. Then, nothing. When my eyes opened again, the morning sky was above me, pale and merciless. The box lay beside me, half covered in dirt, and in that moment, I wished I could believe it had all been a dream. The world came back to me slowly, as if I had been dragged out of deep water. My head throbbed, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if the pounding in my chest was fear or the weight of what I had just seen. The box was still there, tilted on its side, its contents spilling slightly against the fresh earth. I forced myself upright, brushing dirt from my hands, though my palms wouldn't stop trembling. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that exhaustion had played tricks on me, that my mind had filled the box with shadows. But shadows don't carry such weight. What I had seen was real, too real. I closed the lid quickly, as if shutting it could erase the truth. But the image lingered behind my eyes like a brand that wouldn't fade. My breath caught when I realized how exposed I was, kneeling in the yard with the box at my feet. If Daniel looked out the window at that moment, he would know. He would see everything. I glanced back at the house. The curtains were still drawn, the silence inside unbroken. Relief washed over me, but it was thin, fleeting. I knew I couldn't stay there, not with this proof in my hands. I tried to lift the box, but my arms felt weak, my body still shaken from fainting. My knees gave out, and I sat heavily in the dirt, clutching the edge of the box like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I closed my eyes and saw his face, my son as a child, running through this same yard, with laughter spilling out of him, mud on his shoes, light in his eyes. How could the same boy who once reached for my hand in fear now be the man who buried something so dark, so secret, just feet away from where we used to play catch? A crow cawed from the fence, its wings beating the air, startling me into motion. I dragged the box back into the hole and shoveled dirt over it, each thrust heavier than the last, my chest aching with the effort. When the ground was level again, I stood there with the shovel in hand, sweat dripping into my eyes. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced myself to walk back to the house, each step slower than the one before. Inside, I leaned against the kitchen counter, the taste of soil still in my mouth. The truth was buried again, but not from me. No, it was alive now, lodged in my chest, demanding answers. Whatever Daniel had done, whatever he was hiding, it had already changed everything between us. And as much as I wished to look away, I knew this was only the beginning of a story that would not stay buried. The house felt different when I stepped back inside, as if the walls themselves had overheard my secret. I set the shovel by the back door, wiping my palms against my robe, though no amount of scrubbing would take away the feeling of soil under my fingernails. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, each second dragging me further into a silence I couldn't escape. My legs were heavy, but I found my way back to the chair by the window and sat there staring at nothing, listening for the faintest sound from Daniel's room. The door remained closed. Not a creak, not a cough, not even the restless turning of someone asleep. Part of me prayed he was still sleeping deeply, unaware of what I had done. Another part of me feared he was awake, listening, waiting for me to make the first mistake. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest rose too fast. My heart slamming against my ribs, as if to warn me, "Be careful. Be still." I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to chase away the dizziness. The box was gone from sight, covered once more, but it hadn't left me. I could still feel its presence, like a weight buried not in the yard but inside my chest. I thought about the nights before this one, about the phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room, the unexplained money that seemed to come and go, the way his eyes slid away from mine at the dinner table. How blind I had been. A father notices, but sometimes he chooses not to. I had convinced myself his distance was temporary, that life had simply placed too many burdens on his shoulders. Now, I wasn't so sure. I rose slowly, poured another cup of coffee I didn't want, and sat back down. My hands wrapped around the mug for warmth, though my stomach turned at the thought of swallowing even a sip. I stared at the surface of the coffee, dark and unyielding, and in it I saw the reflection of a man who suddenly didn't know his own son. Memories tried to comfort me: Daniel's first bike ride, his graduation day, the way his voice cracked when he told me he wanted to make me proud. Those images clung to me like fragile glass. But behind them was the sight of him in the moonlight, burying something he didn't want me to see. The boy I raised and the man I saw last night didn't fit together, and that broke something in me I couldn't put back. The clock struck 7. Soon he would wake, and the silence between us would be tested. I knew I couldn't carry this question alone for much longer. But how do you look your son in the eye after you've watched him dig a grave for secrets you're not supposed to know? The kitchen smelled faintly of toast and coffee when Daniel finally emerged from his room. His hair was mussed, his eyes heavy, but the way he carried himself made me wonder if he had slept at all. He moved quickly, as if hoping to pass through the kitchen unnoticed. I sat at the table, my cup untouched, pretending to flip through the old newspaper, though my eyes hadn't read a single word. "Morning," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. He froze for half a second before answering. "Morning, Dad." His tone was clipped, polite but distant, the kind of voice a man uses with a stranger on the street. He reached for the bread, buttered 2 slices, and poured himself coffee without once looking at me. I watched him closely, every small movement. The way his shoulders tensed when the toaster clicked. The way his eyes darted toward the window but avoided the corner of the yard. He sat across from me, but positioned his body slightly away, like someone bracing for an unspoken question. I cleared my throat. You were up late last night. He paused, his hand tightening around the handle of his mug. Yeah. Couldn't sleep. He forced a small laugh. Guess it runs in the family. I let the silence stretch, waiting to see if he would say more. He didn't. He chewed his toast, as if the act itself could drown out the truth. I remembered when he was younger, how he used to fill the breakfast table with chatter about school, friends, dreams. Now the only sound was the scrape of his knife on the plate. I tried again. Strange night for a walk, though. His head snapped up, his eyes finally meeting mine. For a moment, I thought I saw fear flicker there. Just a brief spark, before he masked it with a shrug. Yeah, well, sometimes I just need fresh air. Fresh air. My chest tightened at the words. I wanted to slam my hand on the table, demand answers, drag the truth out of him. But the sight of his tired face stopped me. He was still my son. My questions caught in my throat, leaving only silence between us. He finished quickly, rinsed his plate, and muttered something about needing to run errands. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hall, the front door closing behind him. The house fell quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. This was the quiet of suspicion, the quiet that comes when love and doubt collide. I stayed at the table long after he left, staring at the chair he had just vacated, wondering how much longer I could pretend not to know. Because what I had seen last night was not going to let me rest, not until the truth forced its way into the light. When the door shut behind him, I remained seated, the ticking of the wall clock filling the silence he left behind. The air in the kitchen felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension of our brief exchange. I rubbed my temples with both hands, trying to make sense of the unease gnawing at me. I had lived long enough to know that silence can speak louder than words, and Daniel's silence that morning screamed with a weight he couldn't hide. I carried my cup to the sink and stood there for a long while, staring out at the yard. The patch of earth looked so ordinary in the daylight, almost mocking me with its plainness. Birds hopped nearby, pecking at the ground, unaware of the secret beneath their feet. It would be easy, I thought, to bury the memory the way Daniel had buried that box, to pretend I had seen nothing, heard nothing, suspected nothing. A father is supposed to protect his child, not expose him. But then again, what kind of father protects a lie so dangerous it has to be hidden at 3 a.m? I left the kitchen and walked slowly down the hall toward the den. My eyes landed on the old photograph above the mantel, Daniel as a boy, grinning proudly with a fish twice the size of his arm, standing beside me at the lake. I remembered how he had begged me to take him fishing again the very next day. Just us, Dad. No one else. Back then, trust was simple. He looked at me like I was unshakable, and I looked at him like he was my future. Now, that photograph seemed to belong to strangers I once knew. I lowered myself into the armchair, the springs groaning beneath me. My mind churned, weighing possibilities. Should I confront him directly, risk driving him further into secrets, or should I wait, watch, and gather proof before speaking a word? My chest ached with the heaviness of the choice. Love told me to give him time. Fear told me that time might already be too costly. A knock at the front door startled me from my thoughts. I shuffled to answer, half expecting Daniel to have returned, but instead found my neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, holding a basket of apples from her tree. She greeted me warmly, her eyes lingering on my face a little too long. "You look tired, Robert. Rough night?" she asked gently. I forced a smile and thanked her, saying only that I hadn't slept well. I couldn't bring myself to share the truth. Not yet. Some truths are too raw to pass through casual conversation. When she left, I set the basket on the counter, the apples shining in the morning light. My reflection in their skin looked older, wearier, like a man carrying a burden he wasn't ready to speak aloud. I knew then that silence would not save me. Whatever Daniel had buried outside, it had already planted itself inside me, and sooner or later, I would have to decide whether to keep watering that silence or finally dig up the truth. By midday, the house felt unbearably still, the kind of stillness that makes every small sound louder than it should be. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even the rustle of leaves outside pressed against my ears. I tried to busy myself with small chores, folding laundry, sweeping the porch, sorting the stack of mail that had been gathering dust on the table, but nothing settled my mind. Each task crumbled into distraction, my thoughts dragging me back to that patch of earth, to the box I had seen, to the weight I could not name. I found myself pacing the hallway, my hand grazing the wallpaper I had chosen with Daniel's mother so many years ago. She had loved soft colors, gentle patterns, the kind of walls that felt like an embrace. Standing there, I remembered how she used to say that silence between family members could be dangerous, sharper than any argument. "Speak, even if it hurts," she'd whisper. I wondered what she would say now, if she could see how her son and I had drifted into a gulf of secrets. By afternoon, Daniel still hadn't returned. I called his name once or twice, half hoping he'd answer from his room, but the silence that followed was louder than any reply. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table and reached for my old phone. My fingers hovered over the numbers of people I once leaned on: my friend Paul from church, my cousin Linda across town. But I stopped myself. How could I explain what I didn't fully understand? What words could I use to describe the sight of a son burying something in the yard at 3 in the morning? People might nod politely, but their eyes would question my clarity, maybe even my sanity. Age has a way of making truth sound like confusion. Instead, I opened the drawer by the sink and pulled out a small notebook, the kind I used to keep for bills and grocery lists. With shaking hands, I began to write. I wrote down what I had seen, how he moved, the exact time I woke, the sound of the shovel, the shape of the box. My handwriting wavered, but the words anchored me. Proof that it had happened, that it wasn't a dream slipping away. If no one else believed me, the page would. As I finished, I closed the notebook and slid it back into the drawer, my heart heavy. I knew writing wouldn't solve anything, but it was a start. It was me whispering to myself, "You saw it. You know." And as I sat in the fading light, the apples from Mrs. Whitaker's basket glowing faintly on the counter, I understood something unsettling. The silence between Daniel and me was no longer just dangerous. It was alive, stretching wider with each passing hour, waiting for the moment it would finally break. The sun dipped low, staining the sky in muted shades of orange and gray. Shadows stretched long across the yard, reaching toward that patch of earth, as if trying to uncover the truth themselves. I sat by the window again, the same place where I had first seen him, my eyes fixed on that corner of the garden. Each time the wind shifted, the soil seemed to ripple slightly, like a secret whispering from beneath. I thought about calling Daniel, just to hear his voice, but my hand wouldn't move toward the phone. What would I even say? "Son, what did you bury in the yard?" A father doesn't ask that kind of question unless he's ready to face an answer that might break him. Instead, I sat in silence, tracing the rim of my coffee cup, letting the unease crawl deeper inside me. When I finally heard the crunch of tires on the driveway, my breath caught. His car door slammed shut, footsteps quick across the gravel. I leaned back from the window, trying not to look like I'd been waiting. The front door opened, and Daniel stepped inside with a gust of cold air. His face was flushed, his movements brisk, like a man trying to outrun something. He set his keys on the counter, glanced at me once, then busied himself with pouring water into a glass. "Long day?" I asked softly. "Yeah," he muttered. His eyes stayed fixed on the sink. "Just errands. Nothing important." The way he said it, too fast, too light, carried the weight of something unsaid. He drank the water in one long swallow, his hand gripping the glass tighter than it needed to. For a moment I almost asked. The words swelled in my throat, pressing hard, but I swallowed them back. My fear wasn't only of his answer. It was of the distance it would carve between us if I forced it out too soon. We sat at the table for dinner, the two of us chewing in near silence, forks scraping against plates. Once, he asked if the food was fresh from the garden. I nodded, but I noticed he didn't look toward the yard when he said it. His eyes remained on his plate, his jaw tightening with every bite. When the meal was done, he stood quickly, muttering about needing rest, and disappeared into his room. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the quiet house once more. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, the weight of unspoken words pressing against me like a storm cloud ready to burst. That night, as the clock neared midnight, I lay awake again, listening to the silence. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every whisper of wind against the window felt like a reminder. I knew then that this secret would not stay buried forever, and sooner or later, it would come clawing its way to the surface. Sleep teased me that night, but never truly came. I drifted in and out, my body aching for rest, while my mind refused to loosen its grip. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw him again, Daniel, under the pale moon, sweat shining on his forehead, shovel rising and falling with a rhythm too heavy for innocence. The sound of dirt hitting the ground echoed in my head until I woke in a cold sweat, staring into the dark. By morning, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. My eyes were sunken, ringed with shadows. My face seemed older than it had yesterday, as if the night had carved new lines into me. I splashed water on my cheeks, but it didn't wash away the truth. Secrets have a way of aging a man faster than time ever could. When I walked into the kitchen, Daniel was already there, pouring cereal into a bowl. His movements were quiet, almost careful, like someone walking on thin ice. He glanced at me briefly, then looked back down, spooning milk over the flakes. "Morning, Dad," he said. His voice was soft, even kind, but I could hear the effort behind it. He wanted normal, and so did I. But normal had slipped through our fingers the moment I pulled back that curtain at 3 a.m. I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Morning." We ate together, though it hardly felt like eating. My spoon scraped the bottom of the bowl too quickly, my stomach tight with nerves. His hands shook just slightly when he lifted his cup, and I noticed how his eyes never once drifted toward the yard. It was as if that corner of the world no longer existed for him. Or maybe it existed too much. When he finished, he pushed his chair back and stood. "I'll be out most of the day," he said. "Don't wait up." I wanted to stop him, to ask where he was going, to demand answers about the box. Instead, I only nodded, my lips pressed tight. He hesitated for a moment, eyes flicking toward me as if waiting for a question I didn't ask. Then he grabbed his jacket and walked out. The sound of the door closing like a final word, neither of us spoke. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stood by the window once again, watching his car disappear down the street, and I realized I could not live in this house carrying a secret that belonged to both of us, but was spoken by neither. I would have to act, one way or another. A father can only pretend for so long before the weight of love and fear tears him in two. And as I looked out at that patch of earth, still darker than the rest of the yard, I knew the soil was holding not just his secret, but my next decision. The hours stretched after Daniel left, each one heavier than the last. I tried to keep myself busy, polishing the silverware that hadn't been used in years, watering the plants his mother once loved, even sweeping the front porch. But nothing worked. My eyes kept drifting back toward that patch of ground, as if the soil itself was calling me. Secrets buried too close to home have a way of whispering, even when no one speaks. By mid-afternoon, the quiet had worn me down. I sat in the den with the old photo album open across my lap, pages full of moments that once defined us. Daniel's gap-toothed smile on his first day of school, his hand clutching a fishing pole twice his size, the birthday candles he blew out while looking at me, with eyes full of trust. I traced my fingers over those photos, the glossy paper cool beneath my touch, and wondered when that boy had slipped away. Somewhere, between those captured smiles and the man who now avoided my gaze, something had broken, and I hadn't noticed until it was too late. The phone rang suddenly, jolting me. I picked it up, half expecting Daniel's voice, but it was Paul, an old friend from church. He asked how I was, his tone casual, but I hesitated before answering. How could I explain the storm building in my chest? "I'm all right," I lied, though my voice betrayed me with a crack. He paused for a moment, then said quietly, "Sometimes silence does more harm than words, Robert." I didn't respond. I only thanked him and hung up, but his words lingered like an echo I couldn't ignore. As evening fell, the light outside softened into gold. I stood by the window once more, watching long shadows spill across the yard. That patch of earth looked almost peaceful in the fading glow, but I knew better. I could feel it in my bones, the truth buried there would not let me rest. I pressed a hand against the glass, my reflection staring back at me, weary and uncertain. How much longer could I carry this alone? The thought of confronting Daniel scared me, but the thought of doing nothing scared me even more. A father's heart is meant to protect, but what if protecting him meant losing myself? I turned from the window, sat heavily in my chair, and let the silence settle once again. The night was coming, and with it, the promise of choices I could no longer avoid. The night air pressed against the house like a restless tide. I sat in the armchair, the lamp casting a pale circle of light across the floor, my hands folded tight in my lap. Every creak of the walls, every groan of the old pipes felt amplified, as if the house itself was uneasy. I listened for Daniel's return, but hours slipped by with nothing but silence beyond the window. The longer he stayed away, the heavier my thoughts became. I thought back to the days when he was small, when bedtime meant stories told by the glow of a nightlight. He would crawl under the covers and beg me to stay until he fell asleep. Back then, the weight of being needed was a comfort, not a burden. Now I sat alone, wondering how the boy who once feared shadows had become the man who created them. I whispered his name into the quiet, but only the tick of the clock answered. At 10:30, headlights swept across the wall. My chest tightened as I heard the crunch of gravel and the slam of a car door. His footsteps approached slowly this time, measured, almost reluctant. The front door opened, and Daniel stepped in. He looked tired, worn down, his face shadowed in the dim light. For a moment, he stood there without saying a word, then finally muttered, "Sorry I'm late." I nodded, unsure what to say. He walked past me toward his room. His shoulders slumped. I wanted to stop him, to ask him where he had been, why he looked so heavy with secrets. But the words stuck in my throat. My heart ached with the weight of both love and suspicion, and I realized silence was no longer just a choice, it was a chain. "Daniel," I said softly. My voice surprised even me, low but steady. He paused in the hallway, turning slightly, his face half hidden in shadow. "Yes, Dad?" His tone carried a mix of weariness and caution. I opened my mouth, but no words came. The questions I wanted to ask about the yard, the box, the truth, stayed locked behind my lips. Instead, I just shook my head. "Never mind." He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod before disappearing into his room. The door clicked shut, and the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, my hands trembling. I knew I couldn't hold back much longer. Whatever Daniel was hiding, it was pulling both of us into a place where silence would soon shatter. And as I sat there in the dim light, I realized something else. When it did break, the truth would not only change him, it would change me forever. I barely slept. The hours crept by with the sound of Daniel's footsteps pacing faintly in his room, as though he carried the same restless burden I did. When dawn broke, its light crept through the curtains, turning the dust in the air into golden flecks that danced above the floor. I rose slowly, my back stiff, and made my way to the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air, rich and grounding, yet it did little to settle my nerves. Daniel appeared not long after, his face pale, his eyes carrying that same guarded distance I had grown used to. He poured himself a cup without asking if I wanted more, sat across from me, and tried to appear calm. The silence stretched between us like a rope pulled too tight. "Rough night?" I asked, breaking the stillness. He glanced at me briefly, then looked down at his cup. "Yeah. Couldn't sleep." His tone was flat, careful, as if every word had been weighed before it left his mouth. I wanted to ask about the pacing, about the way the floor creaked under his restless steps, but I held my tongue. Instead, I let the quiet linger. He shifted in his chair, uncomfortable under my gaze. Finally, he spoke again, forcing a thin smile. "You don't look like you slept much either." It was meant to sound casual, but I heard the question buried beneath it. Did I see him? Did I know? My heart thudded against my ribs, but I only gave a small shrug. Sleep doesn't come easy these days. His smile faded. He took a slow sip of coffee, then set the cup down with more force than needed. For a moment, his eyes flicked toward the window, the same window that overlooked the corner of the yard. He quickly looked away, but not quickly enough. I saw it. The flicker of unease. The silent acknowledgement that we both knew more than we were willing to admit. I leaned back in my chair, studying him, remembering the boy who once laughed freely, who used to talk to me about his dreams with a light in his eyes. That boy seemed farther away with each passing day, hidden beneath layers of secrets and silence. "Daniel," I said quietly. He looked up, his jaw tight. "Sometimes the truth is lighter than the weight of hiding it." My words hung in the air between us. He swallowed hard, his hands tightening around the cup, but he said nothing. Instead, he stood abruptly, muttered something about needing to get ready, and left the room. His footsteps echoed down the hall, each one carrying the distance between us farther still. I sat there, staring at his empty chair, knowing I had only brushed the surface. Whatever he had buried in that yard, it was not just in the ground. It was inside him, and it was growing. And soon, I would have to decide whether to keep waiting for him to speak or to dig for the truth myself. The day moved slowly. Every hour, a reminder that silence can be as loud as thunder. Daniel left the house, without saying where he was going. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the road, leaving behind nothing but the faint echo of its engine and the gnawing ache in my chest. I lingered in the kitchen, staring at the spot he had left vacant at the table. The air felt thick with unfinished words. I reached for the notebook I had hidden in the drawer the day before and opened it again. My handwriting filled the page, shaky lines capturing every detail of what I had seen. I added more. The pacing at night, the way his eyes flicked toward the yard at breakfast, the tremor in his hands when he lifted his cup. Each word felt like a nail in a board, building something I wasn't sure I wanted to finish, but needed to. When the ink dried, I closed the notebook and set it aside. I couldn't carry this alone forever. My thoughts turned to someone outside these walls, someone who might guide me, without judgment. My neighbor, Paul, had always been steady, the kind of man who listened before speaking. Years ago, he helped me through Margaret's illness, showing up at my door with casseroles and quiet prayers. If there was anyone I could trust with even a fragment of this, it was him. By late afternoon, I found myself walking across the street, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. Paul was trimming the hedges in his yard, his back slightly bent, but his movements still sure. He looked up as I approached, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Robert," he greeted warmly, "you look worn out. Everything all right?" I hesitated, searching his eyes. I couldn't say it all. Not yet. "Haven't been sleeping much," I admitted. "Strange things on my mind." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes the heaviest burdens are the ones we carry alone. You know where to find me if you need to talk." His words were simple, but they reached deeper than I expected. I thanked him and walked back home, my heart heavy but steadier, like a man who had been reminded he wasn't completely alone in the world. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in muted pinks, I sat once again by the window. The yard lay quiet, the patch of soil darker than the rest. Waiting. I knew I couldn't hold this secret much longer. If Daniel refused to speak, I would have to dig not just into the earth, but into the truth he had tried so hard to bury. And when I did, there would be no turning back. I spent the evening walking from room to room like a man who had lost his place in his own home. Every corner of the house carried memories of Daniel's childhood, each one pressing against me with quiet force. The worn banister still bore the scratch from when he slid down it too fast and crashed into the wall. The living room rug still had a faint stain from the grape juice he spilled during his first birthday party after Margaret passed. Everywhere I looked, I saw the boy I had raised with my whole heart. And then I saw the man outside, at 3 a.m, burying something he didn't want me to know. It tore at me in two directions. On one side, I was his father. The part of me that remembered holding him through fevers and nightmares wanted to believe in his goodness, to shield him from whatever storm he had brought into our lives. On the other side, I was a man who had lived long enough to know that secrets have sharp teeth, and silence can be its own kind of betrayal. Protecting him might mean destroying myself. Exposing him might mean losing the last thread of family I had left. I sat in my armchair, staring at the photograph on the mantel, Margaret holding Daniel as a baby, her smile wide and unguarded. She had always believed that truth, even when painful, was an act of love. "Don't let silence grow between you and him," she once told me. "It will turn into a wall you can't climb." I could almost hear her voice in the room with me, soft but firm, urging me to choose. But how does a father choose between love and truth? My hands shook as I poured myself another cup of coffee, though I barely tasted it. My reflection in the dark liquid looked like a stranger, a man caught between fear and duty. I thought of calling Paul again, of telling him more, but shame stopped me. What kind of father admits he doesn't trust his own son? As night pressed in once more, I stood at the window, staring at that patch of earth, the ground now hardened by the chill. The box beneath it wasn't just Daniel's secret anymore. It was mine, too, and the longer I kept it hidden, the more it would consume me. I knew a decision was coming, one that would test not only my faith in my son, but in myself. And yet, as much as I longed to act, I couldn't move. I remained there, still as stone, with the feeling that the next step I took would change everything between us, forever. The next morning began with a heaviness that pressed on my chest before I even opened my eyes. I rose slowly, the ache in my joints sharper than usual, though I knew it wasn't just my body carrying weight. It was the silence between Daniel and me, stretching wider with each passing day. The house smelled faintly of coffee. He had already been in the kitchen before me, moving quietly, leaving behind no trace except for the empty cup by the sink. I poured myself a cup and sat at the table, the steam curling upward like a whisper I couldn't quite catch. My mind kept circling the same question. Do I confront him, or do I stay silent? Love tugged me one way, fear the other. A father's heart isn't made for suspicion. It's made for trust, for forgiveness. But trust felt fragile now, and forgiveness seemed impossible without truth. I thought of Margaret again. She had been the stronger one when it came to choices like this. She faced hardship with an open hand, believing honesty, even when painful, built something lasting. I could almost hear her voice. Don't let doubt poison you, Robert. Speak, even if it shakes the walls. I rubbed my temples, wishing she were here to guide me. Without her, the weight felt unbearable. Daniel returned mid-morning, his steps light but his eyes shadowed. He greeted me with a quick nod, sat down with his phone in hand, and scrolled in silence. I watched him over the rim of my cup, searching for the boy I once knew. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw a softness in his eyes when the light hit them just right, the trace of a smile tugging at his mouth. But it vanished, quickly, replaced by that guarded distance. Daniel, I said, my voice careful. He looked up, waiting. The words gathered on my tongue, pressing to be spoken. I saw you. I know what you did. Asterisk. But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was, Are you all right? He blinked, surprised, then gave a short laugh. Yeah, Dad. Just tired. Don't worry so much. He stood before I could answer, patting my shoulder in a way that felt more like reassurance for himself than for me. Then he disappeared into his room, the door closing gently behind him. I sat alone again, my hands tightening around the mug. My question had been too small, my courage too weak. Yet the moment had shown me something undeniable. Daniel was carrying more than he wanted me to see, and if I didn't act soon, the silence might swallow us both whole. The day carried on with a slowness that gnawed at me. I tried to read the paper, but the words blurred. I turned on the radio, but the voices felt distant, meaningless. My thoughts circled the same track, never moving forward. Every time I pictured Daniel's face at breakfast, his forced smile, the way he dodged my question, I felt the same sharp sting of helplessness. I stepped out onto the porch in the afternoon, hoping the air might clear my mind. The breeze carried the scent of cut grass from a few houses down, a smell that once reminded me of summer evenings when Daniel was young. Back then, He would run barefoot through the yard while Margaret called us in for dinner, her voice carrying warmth through the air. Those days seemed so far away now, as if they belonged to another life altogether. My neighbor Paul passed by, waving as he carried groceries from his car. He paused when he saw me standing there. "You holding up all right?" he asked. His eyes lingered on me, kind but searching. I forced a smile. "Just tired," I said. He nodded, not pressing further, though I sensed he wanted to. As he walked away, I felt the ache of my own words. Tired. That wasn't the truth. The truth was, I was unraveling. But I couldn't bring myself to share it, not yet. Back inside, I found myself wandering toward Daniel's room. I stood at the closed door, my hand hovering over the knob. I thought of knocking, of asking him directly, of breaking through the silence we had built. But fear froze me in place. What if he lied again? What if the truth shattered what little we had left? I lowered my hand, ashamed of my own hesitation, and returned to the living room. As evening fell, Daniel emerged briefly, grabbing his jacket. "I'll be out late," he said, his voice quick, almost dismissive. I nodded, too tired to argue, too weighed down to ask where he was going. The door closed behind him, and I sat alone once more, staring at the patch of soil outside the window. The shadows lengthened, covering it in darkness, but I could still feel it like a heartbeat pulsing beneath the ground. I leaned back in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests. The dilemma pressed harder now than ever. To remain silent was to betray myself. To speak might break the bond with my only son. Either way, something precious would be lost. As the night deepened, I whispered into the empty room, "Margaret, what would you have me do?" But only silence answered, heavy and unyielding, leaving me with a choice I still didn't know how to make. That night, I couldn't keep still. I moved from the armchair to the window, from the window to the hallway, then back again, pacing like a man waiting for a verdict he already feared. The house felt too quiet, and each tick of the clock sounded like a hammer against my chest. When Daniel finally returned, the clock had already passed midnight. I heard the door open, the creak of his shoes on the floorboards, and then the steady rhythm of his footsteps down the hall. His door shut softly, but I knew from the restless shifting behind it that he wasn't sleeping any more than I was. I sat by the window, watching the faint glow of his lamp under the crack of his door. It reminded me of when he was a boy, staying up late to finish homework, the pencil scratching against paper until his eyelids could no longer fight gravity. I used to knock gently and tell him it was time to rest. He would grin sheepishly and say, "Just 5 more minutes, Dad." But this light wasn't the warm glow of a child's diligence. It was the glow of secrets, of shadows he was keeping, even from me. I thought of confronting him right then, of walking down the hall and opening his door, forcing the silence to break. My hand even reached for the armrest, ready to push myself up, but I froze. What would I say? How would I ask without sounding like an accuser? He was my son, the boy I had raised alone after Margaret passed, the boy whose laughter once filled this house. And yet, he was also the man I had seen with a shovel under the pale moonlight, burying something too heavy for daylight to touch. Love and fear pulled at me like 2 hands, tearing in opposite directions. I whispered his name, though too softly for him to hear. The word trembled on my lips, heavy with both longing and dread. For a moment, I imagined Margaret's voice in my ear, telling me that love meant facing the truth together, not alone. But my courage faltered. I remained in the chair, my eyes locked on that faint glow until it finally disappeared. His lamp went dark, leaving only shadows. As the house fell into silence once more, I knew the moment for confrontation had slipped away. But the question it left behind was sharper than ever. How many more nights could I sit in this silence before it broke me completely? Morning light crept through the curtains, but it didn't bring comfort. It only revealed how worn I looked in the mirror, eyes ringed with shadows, skin pale, shoulders stooped as though the weight of the house itself rested on me. I splashed cold water on my face, but it did nothing to wash away the heaviness. My heart carried a secret it was never meant to hold, and it showed. When I stepped into the kitchen, Daniel was already there. He stood by the counter, dressed neatly, his jacket over one arm. He glanced at me, offered a short morning, and poured himself coffee. His movements were quick, efficient, almost rehearsed, like someone who had practiced how to appear normal, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand lingered on the cup as if he needed the warmth to steady himself. I sat at the table, watching him carefully. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, I said, "You've been keeping late hours." The words were simple, but my voice carried more than I intended. Curiosity, suspicion, maybe even hurt. He froze just for a moment before answering. "Work stuff, friends. You know how it is." His tone was light, but his eyes didn't meet mine. "Daniel," I said softly, my voice catching, "if something's wrong, you can tell me." His gaze flicked up then, sharp and guarded. For a split second, I thought he might spill everything, that the silence between us would finally break. But just as quickly, his expression hardened. "I'm fine, Dad." "Really?" He set his cup down, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. I sat there, my hands wrapped around my own cup, though the coffee had long gone cold. The words I had meant to say clung to my throat, heavy and unsaid. Should I press harder? Should I demand to know what he had buried? Or would that push him farther away, beyond a line we could never cross back? The door shut behind him, leaving me with nothing but the echo of his footsteps fading down the street. I stared out the window at the yard, at the ground that seemed to stare back at me. The dilemma gnawed at me. Remain silent and let the secret rot us from within, or confront him and risk shattering what little was left between us. And in that quiet kitchen, with the weight of both love and fear pressing on me, I realized I could no longer avoid the choice. One way or another, it would have to be made. That evening, when Daniel returned home, I decided I couldn't sit in silence anymore. My stomach churned with nerves as I waited for him at the kitchen table, the same place we had shared countless meals, the same place where laughter once filled the air. The light above buzzed softly, casting a dull glow on the chipped wood between us. He walked in with a faint smile, too faint to be real. "Hey, Dad," he said, setting his keys down. He grabbed a glass from the cupboard, filled it with water, and leaned against the counter as if trying to keep the distance between us. I studied him carefully, and he felt it. His eyes flicked to me, then away, unsettled. "Long day?" I asked, my tone light, but my gaze steady. "Yeah," he answered quickly. "Busy." His voice was flat, his hand gripping the glass too tightly. I let the silence stretch before speaking again. "I was in the yard earlier," I said, casual, almost careless. "That corner by the fence. The soil looks freshly turned." For a heartbeat, everything in him stilled. His jaw tightened, His eyes froze on the glass in his hand. Then, just as quickly, he forced a laugh. I was clearing weeds last night. Didn't want them to spread. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept it. But I didn't let my eyes leave his face. Strange hour. For yard work. He set the glass down too hard, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. Couldn't sleep. He muttered. Needed to do something. I leaned forward slightly. Daniel, if there's something you want to tell me, you can. You don't have to carry it alone. His eyes met mine then. And for the briefest moment I thought I saw a crack in his armor. A flicker of the boy who once came running to me when he scraped his knee. But just as quickly, he looked away, shaking his head. There's nothing to tell, Dad. You're worrying over nothing. He grabbed his jacket again, as if eager to escape, and headed for the door. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the hum of the light and the echo of his words. I sat there, my heart heavy. I had tested him, given him a chance to speak the truth. Instead, he had chosen silence dressed as excuses. And as I stared at the empty chair across from me, I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever he was hiding, it was bigger than weeds in the yard. And soon, I would have to decide whether to let him bury me in his lies or to uncover the truth myself. The following morning, I rose earlier than usual, though it wasn't rest that woke me. It was unease, pressing at my chest until I couldn't lie still any longer. The sky was still dim, streaked with the first gray light of dawn. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, waiting. My plan was simple, though it weighed on me. I would not accuse Daniel, but I would seek counsel. Sometimes, a father's heart needs another voice to steady it. When the sun climbed higher, I walked across the street to Paul's house. He was in his yard, trimming branches with the same steady patience I remembered from our younger years. His back was bent, but his movements were sure. When he saw me, he set down the shears and gave me a smile that reached his eyes. "Robert," he said warmly, "you look like a man with a storm on his mind." I hesitated before speaking. "I don't know how to say this, Paul. Something's not right with Daniel." My voice cracked, the weight of the words almost too much. I saw him outside in the middle of the night. He was burying something." Paul's smile faded. His eyes sharpened with quiet concern. He didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me. Instead, he nodded slowly. "And you don't know what it was?" I shook my head. "I dug it up, Paul. I saw what was in the box, and I fainted. I can't even tell you how it felt. But since that night, I've been carrying this fear. He won't talk to me. He lies, or he looks away. I don't know my own son anymore." Paul placed a hand on my shoulder, steady and firm. "Robert, sometimes love makes us blind. You've carried that boy through storms, but he's a man now, with choices you may not like. The truth is, you have to be careful. Don't rush to accuse him, but don't bury your head in the sand either. Secrets have a way of spreading if you don't face them." I felt my throat tighten, tears threatening. What if facing it breaks us apart? Paul sighed, his eyes softening. "Then ask yourself this: is what you have now really closeness? Or just silence dressed as family? Sometimes the only way back is through the truth." I thanked him, my voice low, my chest heavy. Walking back to the house, I carried his words like stones in my pocket. They didn't make the path easier, but they gave it weight. And weight can sometimes guide a man more than comfort. Back inside, I stood by the window, staring at the patch of earth once again. Paul was right. Silence was only feeding the fear. The next step, I knew, would bring me closer to the heart of Daniel's secret. But it might also tear open wounds neither of us were ready to face. That evening, I found myself pacing the living room, waiting for Daniel to return. Paul's words rang in my ears. Silence, dressed as family. I couldn't unhear it. It made me realize how long I had been mistaking our quiet dinners and clipped conversations for peace, when in truth, they were only walls between us. The longer I let them stand, the higher they grew. When the door finally opened, Daniel stepped inside with his usual careful smile. He hung his jacket on the hook, set his keys on the counter, and moved quickly toward his room. But I called his name before he could vanish behind that door. Daniel. He stopped, his shoulders stiffening. Slowly, he turned back, his face unreadable. Yeah, Dad? I gestured to the table. Sit with me a minute. My voice was calm, but steady enough that he knew I wouldn't take no for an answer. He hesitated, then dropped into the chair across from me, leaning back with his arms crossed, waiting. I studied him for a long moment. The boy I had raised was still there somewhere, buried under the man who now looked at me with wary eyes. I took a deep breath. You've seemed distant, restless, like something's weighing on you. I'm not here to accuse you, son. I just need to know if you're all right. For the first time in days, his eyes met mine directly. There was no anger in them, no sharpness, only exhaustion. He rubbed his hands together and let out a laugh that carried no humor. Dad, you worry too much. I'm fine, really. But I had lived long enough to know when words were only a mask. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. Daniel, I saw you outside the other night. 3 a.m, by the fence. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. He blinked, swallowed, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I told you I was pulling weeds. I shook my head gently. Weeds don't get buried in boxes. The silence that followed was thick, pressing on both of us. His jaw clenched, his hands fisted on the table. For a moment, I thought he would lash out. Instead, he pushed back his chair abruptly, the legs scraping against the floor. I don't want to talk about this, he said, his voice low, almost trembling. He turned and walked toward his room, shutting the door with a force that rattled the frame. I sat there alone, the echo of his words lingering in the air. My test had not brought truth, only deeper shadows. But the look on his face when I spoke told me one thing for certain. Whatever he had buried, it was something he never wanted me to find. The silence after Daniel's door shut was heavier than any argument. I sat at the table, staring at the wood grain as though it could offer me answers. My chest ached with the weight of our exchange. I had seen the flicker of fear in his eyes when I mentioned the box. He hadn't expected me to notice, let alone speak of it. And now, the air between us was colder, sharper, filled with things neither of us had the courage to say. I rose slowly and walked down the hall, stopping outside his room. My hand hovered near the doorknob, but I didn't knock. I stood there, listening instead. The faint creak of the floorboards told me he was pacing. Once, I heard him mutter something under his breath, too muffled to understand. It was the sound of a man wrestling with himself. After a while, the pacing stopped, and silence swallowed the room. I returned to the living room, my steps heavier than before. I lowered myself into the armchair, the same one I had sat in for years, the fabric worn by time and memory. Margaret's photograph rested on the mantel across from me, her smile frozen, in a moment when life had been lighter. I could almost hear her voice, urging me to find strength. She had always believed that running from truth only deepened the wound. I closed my eyes, whispering, "What would you do, Maggie?" But only the creak of the house answered me. The hours dragged. Daniel never came out again, not even for dinner. The house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the old clock in the hallway. I thought about calling Paul again, but what would I say? That I had tried, and my son had shut me out? That the distance between us felt like an ocean I could no longer swim? Shame held me back. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard. The patch of soil by the fence was darker now, shadowed under the moonlight, the same as when I had first seen him bury the box. It called to me, tempting me to dig again, to face the truth, without waiting for Daniel's permission. My hands trembled at the thought. I wanted to know, but I also feared what knowing would cost me. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, eyes fixed on that scar in the earth. One way or another, this silence couldn't last. If Daniel refused to open his mouth, then the ground itself would have to. And when it did, I wasn't sure either of us would be ready for what lay beneath. The morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that promised rain but refused to deliver it. I sat at the table with my coffee untouched, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Daniel's door stayed closed, though I knew he was awake. I could hear the faint shuffle of his movements, the soft thud of drawers opening and closing. He was preparing for something, though he didn't say a word. When he finally emerged, his face was drawn, his eyes carrying that same shadow I had come to recognize. He grabbed a slice of bread, ate it without butter, and poured himself coffee, without looking at me. The silence between us was no longer awkward. It was a wall. And I knew if I didn't do something soon, that wall would grow too high for either of us to climb. "Daniel," I said, breaking the quiet. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled under the table. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." He froze, cup halfway to his lips. Slowly, he set it down and looked at me, his jaw tightening. "What is it?" I swallowed hard. "If your mother were here, do you think she'd be proud of the man you've become?" His eyes widened, caught off guard. He blinked, then forced a laugh that didn't sound like him. "That's a strange question, Dad." "Strange," I said, leaning forward. "But important." My words carried more weight than I expected. Because the choices you make now, the secrets you keep, they don't just belong to you. They carry through this house, through me, through the memory of the woman who raised you. His face hardened, but not with anger, with something closer to guilt. He shifted in his chair, his hands restless. "Why are you asking me this?" His voice was low, defensive. "Because I need to know," I whispered. "I need to know the son I raised is still in there. Somewhere." For a moment, the mask slipped. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes flicked toward the window, the very spot that overlooked the yard. He looked away quickly, but I saw it. I saw the truth in that fleeting glance. He knew I knew. "I don't want to talk about this," he muttered, standing abruptly. His chair scraped the floor as he pushed it back. He grabbed his jacket and moved toward the door, his steps quick, almost desperate. "Daniel," I called, but the door shut before I could finish. His footsteps faded down the walk, swallowed by the sound of the morning wind. I sank back into my chair, the silence louder than any argument. My question had pierced him, even if he refused to answer. And now, more than ever, I knew the truth would not stay hidden much longer. The ground outside wasn't the only thing holding secrets, my son was too. And both were close to breaking open. The house felt emptier after Daniel left, as though his absence carried more weight than his presence ever had. I wandered from room to room, my hands brushing against the furniture, the walls, the frames filled with photographs of a boy who once clung to me as if I were his whole world. I stopped at the mantel again, staring at Margaret's picture. Her smile seemed to ask me a question I still couldn't answer. How far was I willing to go for the truth? By late afternoon, the silence gnawed at me so deeply that I could no longer sit still. I found myself in Daniel's room, my hand hesitating on the doorknob. It felt wrong to enter, but it felt worse not to. Slowly, I pushed it open. The air inside was stale, carrying the faint smell of sweat and something metallic I couldn't quite place. His bed was unmade. Clothes scattered on the chair. Papers stacked carelessly on the desk. I walked carefully, almost tiptoeing, as if he might catch me, even though I knew he wasn't there. On the desk lay envelopes, some torn open, others unopened, with unfamiliar names printed on them. I picked one up and felt my stomach twist. It was a notice, demanding payment. The next one was the same, and the next. Debt, stacked like bricks of a wall closing in around him. I set the papers down with trembling hands, my breath shallow. This was part of it. Whatever was buried in the yard, it was tied to these debts. I searched the drawers next, finding scraps of receipts, scribbled notes, and a small metal key taped beneath the wood. I held it for a long time, wondering what it unlocked, then slipped it into my pocket. My heart raced, as though I were the one hiding secrets now. Just then, the sound of footsteps outside froze me. Daniel's car door slammed, and his quick stride approached the porch. Panic surged through me. I stuffed the envelopes back into the drawer, straightened the chair, and slipped out of the room just as the front door opened. "Dad?" he called, his voice sharp. I stood in the hallway, forcing a calm expression. "I'm here," I answered, steadying my breath. He looked at me carefully, suspicion flickering in his eyes, but said nothing. He walked past me into his room, closing the door behind him with a firmness that felt more like a lock than a gesture. I sat back in my chair, the key heavy in my pocket, the memory of those envelopes burning in my mind. I had wanted answers, and I had found the edge of them. But I knew the truth went deeper, just like the box buried beneath the soil outside. And soon, one way or another, I would have to dig further. The tension in the house grew unbearable. Every time Daniel walked past me, I could feel the weight of the unspoken pressing between us, thicker than the walls themselves. He avoided my eyes now, moving quickly from room to room, as though afraid that one glance might unravel the silence we had both been clinging to. The envelopes I'd found, the key still hidden in my pocket, they burned in my thoughts, demanding to be spoken aloud. I knew it was time. There was no turning back. That evening, when the light outside began to fade and the air turned heavy with the smell of rain, I called out to him. "Daniel," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook. "We need to talk." He appeared in the doorway, arms folded, jaw set. "About what?" His tone was sharp, defensive, but I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit." He hesitated, then dropped into the seat, leaning back as though he wanted to put as much distance between us as possible. His gaze darted toward the window, toward the yard, before returning to me. That glance told me everything. I leaned forward. "I know about the debts. I know about the late nights. And I know what you buried." The words left my mouth like stones, heavy and final. His face paled. His lips parted, then closed again, searching for an answer. "You've been going through my things?" he snapped, his voice louder than I expected. "I'm your father," I said firmly, though my chest ached. "You may close your door, you may hide your papers, but I see you. I've always seen you." His hands tightened into fists on the table. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," I interrupted. "Because right now, all I see is a son I don't recognize. A son who keeps burying pieces of himself in the ground, thinking they'll stay hidden. Daniel, I raised you to know better than this. Tell me the truth." For a long moment, silence filled the room. His breathing grew heavier, his eyes shining not with tears but with the strain of holding back. He shook his head slowly, his voice low. "You wouldn't forgive me if I told you." I reached across the table, my hand trembling as I placed it flat against the wood. "Son, forgiveness isn't the question. Truth is, I can't carry your silence anymore. If you don't tell me, the earth outside will, and when it does, it will be too late." His eyes locked on mine then, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't look away. His lips parted, the weight of words pressing to escape, and in that moment, I knew the confrontation I had feared was finally here, and nothing in our lives would be the same after what came next. Daniel's shoulders slumped as if the fight drained out of him all at once. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his hands covering his face. For a long time, he didn't speak, and the silence between us stretched so thin I thought it might break. Finally, his muffled voice came through his fingers. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Then tell me. Tell me what's going on, Daniel." He lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot, a mixture of shame and exhaustion clouding them. "It started with the debts. I thought I could handle it. Quick money, easy deals. I was wrong." His voice cracked. "The people I owed weren't patient. They wanted proof. They wanted something to hold over me." My heart pounded as his words fell like stones into the quiet room. "So you buried it," I whispered. "Whatever it is, you buried it, to hide it from me, from them." He looked away, his jaw tight. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let you see, Dad. I couldn't stand the disappointment in your eyes." "Disappointment?" My voice rose, breaking with the weight of it. "Do you think disappointment is worse than this silence? Worse than me watching you bury secrets in the middle of the night?" My chest ached, the pain raw. "I carried you through storms, Daniel. I gave my life to make sure you never had to carry burdens alone. And now you're telling me you've been carrying this without me?" He slammed his fist on the table, startling even himself. "Because you wouldn't understand." His breath came fast, ragged, then softer, almost broken. He added, "You still see me as that boy who used to fall asleep on your shoulder. I didn't want you to know the man I've become." I leaned back, my body trembling with a sorrow that felt too deep for words. "The man you've become is still my son," I said quietly. "Even if he's made mistakes, even if he's buried things he shouldn't have. But what I can't accept, Daniel, is being shut out of your life while you drown." For the first time, his eyes filled with tears. He didn't blink away. He looked at me as though weighing whether to open the last door of his secret. His lips parted, his voice shaking. "If I show you what's in that box, Dad, you'll never look at me the same again." The room fell silent. The clock ticked on the wall, steady, and merciless. I reached out, my hand trembling but firm, and said, "Then let me decide for myself." And in that moment, I knew the choice was no longer his alone. The truth was coming, whether either of us was ready or not. The rain began not long after. Soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the windows as though the sky itself was demanding honesty. Daniel sat across from me, his head bowed, his fingers tapping anxiously against the table. He looked younger in that moment, stripped of his defenses, like the boy who once came to me trembling after breaking a neighbor's window with his baseball. But this wasn't glass we could sweep away. This was something far heavier. I waited, giving him space, letting the sound of the rain fill the silence. At last, he lifted his eyes to mine. They were wet, but not from the storm outside. "You really want to see?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I need to," I replied. "Not because I want to judge you, but because I can't carry this shadow anymore. Whatever's in that box, Daniel, it's already between us. Let me see it. Let me share the weight." He looked toward the window, toward the corner of the yard, as though he could see through the rain to the very spot where his secret lay. His lips trembled before he spoke again. "If I show you, you have to promise me one thing, that you won't walk away." By duh, my throat tightened. "Son, I've stood by you since the day you came into this world. I'm not leaving now." For a moment, relief flickered across his face, but it was quickly swallowed by dread. He stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. "I can't believe I let it get this far," he muttered, almost to himself. Then louder, to me, "I'll dig it up. Tonight. You'll see for yourself." I rose from my chair, my legs stiff, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "Then we go together," I said. He looked at me, startled, as though the thought had never crossed his mind. For a long time, we stood there in silence, the rain pounding harder, thunder rolling in the distance. At last, he gave a small nod. "All right. Together." I placed my hand on his shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't pull away. The storm outside raged on, but inside, there was a fragile truce. We both knew the next step would change everything. The truth lay buried only a few feet away, yet it felt like miles. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, I realized that once the earth gave up its secret, nothing in this house would ever be the same again. The rain eased by the time midnight came, leaving the yard soaked and glistening under the dim porch light. Daniel and I stood side by side, shovels in hand, the wet earth soft beneath our boots. Neither of us spoke as we walked toward the corner of the yard, the very place where all of this had begun. The night air was heavy with the smell of soil and rain, a weight pressing against my chest. Daniel stopped first, his eyes fixed on the dark patch of ground. His hands trembled as he drove the shovel into the earth. I watched him work, each thrust slower, more hesitant, as if the closer he came to the truth, the more it burned inside him. After a few minutes, he stepped back, breath ragged. "I can't," he whispered. "You do it." My hands shook as I took the shovel. The sound of metal biting into wet soil echoed in the night. Piece by piece, I unearthed what he had tried so hard to hide. The box appeared again, its edges slick with mud, its presence heavier than before. I knelt down, brushing the dirt away with my fingers. My heart pounded as I reached for the lid. Daniel's voice broke through the silence. "Dad, please, Before you open it, just know I never wanted it this way." I looked up at him, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes wide and pleading. "Then tell me," I said. "Tell me what I'm about to see." But he only shook his head, tears sliding down his cheeks. "I can't. Not yet." The box sat between us, mud-streaked and silent, daring me to lift its lid. My fingers hovered over the latch, my breath caught in my throat. Every part of me wanted to know, yet every part of me feared that knowledge would undo whatever was left of us. The night around us held its breath, waiting. I drew in a shaky breath, my hand tightening on the box. "Whatever's in here, Daniel, it's going to change everything." He closed his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "I know." And with the storm clouds gathering once more overhead, I pulled the box closer. The truth only an inch away, yet just before I opened it, a sound from the house stopped us cold. The creak of the front door, slow and deliberate, as if someone else had been waiting all along. Daniel's head snapped up. My heart froze. The box remained shut between us, its secret still buried in silence, as the night revealed one more shadow neither of us expected.